Hi, I'm Elizabeth Diana. I lead Deel's communications globally. And Deel, you may not be familiar with Deel. We are a platform, a global HR platform that aims to simplify how companies can hire, pay, manage their employees and their contractors anywhere in the world. Our goal is to allow millions of companies and people to be matched up and hopefully improve the future of work. I'm joined here today by Samuel Dahan, who's the chair of the newly created Deel Lab for Global Employment, and we're more in that in a second. And then also Laura Becking, who is a partner at Orrick and leads up Orrick's global employment practice. So thank you both for coming and discussing Deel Lab and discussing the future of work and what it holds.
So I'm Samuel Dahan. I am the chair of the Deel Lab, and I'm a law professor. And my area of work is employment law and analytics.
Great to be with you, Elizabeth and Samuel. I'm Laura Becking. I head up our global employment, equity compensation, and immigration practice here at Orrick. And my focus is on people issues outside the US, mostly for US-based tech companies.
Let's start with what the Deel Lab for Global Employment is about really quickly. If you could maybe say a few sentences about it, Samuel, since you're chairing. And, to back up, I would love to have a bit of a discussion with you and Laura on just trends you're seeing. A lot has changed in the past 2 years, but even prior, from a legal perspective, but also just from a worker-employer perspective. Would love to hear just thoughts on what's going on, share the context.
Yes, so the Deel Lab is a consortium of academics and industry partners interested in global work. We're talking about workers that are involved in international work. It could be contractors, it could be employees. And we've realized over the last few years that there are a lot of policy and legal issues. And the aim, it's a modest goal for now. The aim is to understand what are the policy hurdles that employers and employees are facing in this new global context, which is not so new, but has been exploding over the last few years. And I'm sure perhaps Laura can confirm that.
Yeah, Laura, I would love to hear what you were hearing, what's changed over the past few years.
Absolutely. So absolutely agree, Samuel. This is a space that has always been around, but has definitely grown exponentially over the last few years. There was a time, particularly, say, for growth companies, that they would not start as global companies. They'd just be a local company. I think almost every growth company starts as a global company now, right? Mm-hmm. They have at least one person that is outside of their place of primary operation. So that's just to indicate how this has changed. What we really look at in my practice are all the issues around having people outside of the US mostly. So I want to go into a country. I've got amazing talent that I've located in this country, but I don't operate there. I don't have a subsidiary there. How do I do that? How do I engage that talent? Or for very large companies that are already public, I'm acquiring a company that has all these operations in a country or countries that I don't operate in today, or it's bolting on to what I already have in place. And how do I manage that environment? I would say that COVID has even further accelerated it. Of course, the COVID time, because remote work became something that became very commonplace and people were moving around the globe. So I think a trend that was already happening just accelerated because of that, where people understood, oh yeah, I can have an engineer sitting wherever and still producing amazing product and working for me. And so that talent hunt across the globe expanded.
What are the main things that you advise clients on? Are there certain areas that they have the most that are more complex than others? I'd be curious to know.
For our younger clients, our smaller clients, the big issue is, how do I access that global talent pool, mm-hmm. while not being ready to set up subsidiaries in 10 different countries, right? I'm not that level of maturity yet as a company. I can't do that spend. I can't take on that regulatory complexity of having those operations. But I do want to access that talent that's sitting literally everywhere. And that in principle, I'm happy to have sit everywhere, but for the struggle around how do I engage them. So we talk a lot about what are the different forms that you can do that in, and the fact that the current regulatory environment doesn't necessarily match up to what they're trying to achieve.
More on that later. I want to hold that thought. So You have been working with Deel for a while. Maybe we can back up. Samuel, do you want to talk about just Deel in general? How did you come to learn about Deel? What does Deel do? And then Laura, I'd love to hear more about how you work with Deel.
Yeah, I came to work with Deel a few years ago when my lab at Queen's University in McGill, we developed a misclassification algorithm. So it's a tool that helps workers and employers to determine in which legal category they fall into. And then I've been noticing Deel a few years ago as first a fast-growing company, but also a company that provides simplified solutions for employers that want to expand internationally without having to set up their own structure. And so for me, it seemed like a streamlined tool for employers to outsource HR tasks and while remaining compliant with local employment law.
And then Laura, you mentioned, or you've worked with Deel in the past. How, up until the Deel lab, how are you involved with Deel?
I've had the pleasure of working with Deel both as a client of the firm, as they themselves were growing and expanding across the globe, and being part of thinking about that process, which has been extremely fun. And also with clients who work with Deel themselves, other clients, as they try to manage this issue and turn to Deel and others to address the workforce strategies that they're putting in place.
Samuel, back up. So Deel Lab, how did it come about? Set the scene.
Yeah.
How did we get here?
Yes, so I've known the Alex, the CEO of the company, and his father, who is now the CEO of the company. And we've been talking about building new tools, compliance tools, AI-based, compliant, analytics-based tools to help their clients and workers in general to understand the regulation better. I mean, as you know, Deel operates in a lot of countries. And as most of you know, the employment law is very different from one place to another, even in Europe. I mean, German employment law and French employment law, even their neighbors, are very, very different. So the idea, the original high-level idea was why don't we build an AI system that can answer basic legal questions that can help employers to be compliant. So then eventually we realized, but there's a bigger question out there. I mean, there are two observations that we made a few years ago, and by no means we're reinventing the wheel. I mean, there are two main problems an employer facing, global employers. And even as Laura said earlier, like global employers used to be much more resourceful than they are now. I mean, they're the digital native company, but they're the global native company. Companies that start right away from day one as global employers, which seems kind of insane if you think about it from, if we think about it 10 years ago. So, but there are two problems these companies are facing. The first one is lack of clarity in the regulation, not necessarily because the regulation is unclear, maybe sometimes it is, but also because it's just different from one country to another, and they need to grasp the complexity of employment law, which is always like kind of which is very fact driven, not easy.
Right.
So, and that creates a lot of compliance issue. And there's another problem that employers are facing is the fact that sometimes there are no laws. There don't exist. You take the example of pension or misclassification of the employer and the employee and independent contractor status. There are many employees that don't really fall into one or the other or one category. So I think one of the idea based on these two observations, the fact that it's complex, that there's a lack of clarity, the fact that there is a void, I think there is a need to reflect a little bit further on what are the problems. And in order to assess a problem, there are many tools, including analytics, data science, that can help employers to be more compliant and at least understand the law better. But there is also a lot of rooms for practitioners, academics, industry partners, policymakers to think about what are the problems and how can we come up with new policies that will be better able to match the new economic reality we live in.
You mentioned misclassification. I mean, Laura, what happens when someone is misclassified, like in the law? I'd love to know a little bit about that, to tease that out. And then also, following on Samuel's discussion around Deel Lab, how are you going to be involved? How is Orrick going to be involved, and you specifically?
So, well, on the classification point, what happens can be multifaceted and potentially can be quite serious, right? If an individual is misclassified, right? Because you hit 3 different areas of law, at least. In any case, you hit tax laws because you're probably not doing the withholding and reporting properly. So you've got a tax regulatory issue, which, can be pretty serious. You have a labor and employment issue where an individual has been wrongly categorized as a contractor when they should have been an employee. So you have the labor authorities. So now you've got the tax authorities and the labor authorities. So you're already off to a good start. And then you have issues around equity compensation potentially, because granting equity to a contractor versus an employee can make that space more complicated and potentially run you into securities law issues as well. So you run into quite quickly fairly significant parts of legal systems in most countries. And, companies will definitely from time to time take a view that with one person, perhaps the risk for a short time, et cetera, you can take measured business views. But as a structural approach, it's not really a business model, right? It's not the solution. Yeah. So, to your question on Deel, one of the things that what we really do a lot with our clients is thinking obviously about the regulatory environment, the legal climate, what the rules are, sort of the type of thing we're just talking about, misclassification. But we also do a lot of looking around the corner, right? And seeing where the market is. I mean, we have over 4,000 companies in our tech practice. So we see a lot. We have a lot of sense of what market practice is at different phases of a company's life, right? Whether it's a newly formed company, just about to go IPO or already IPO'd, or a larger, mature public company. And so a lot of the thinking we do is around that, looking around the corner. What makes sense? What is the business needing? How does that regulatory environment fit? So when Samuel and I spoke for the first time, it was actually a really fun conversation, at least I found, because there was so much overlap on what we were both thinking about. And obviously from slightly different perspectives, because I'm thinking about it from there's a company trying to solve a problem immediately on my plate, so I don't get to take quite as long a view. But sort of seeing Samuel's views and understanding how he's thinking about these things from a little bit bigger, little bit more setback perspective was just extremely refreshing and exciting.
Deel Lab launches. Samuel, what's like the first few things you're thinking about in terms of what are the first few hurdles to overcome or goals to meet?
First thing first, I think we want to understand the problem. So I think what we'll be doing, and I'm thinking about a practical book or set of guidelines and a book project on global work, a comparative law project that will be helpful for anyone out there. I mean, anyone, both workers and employers. So that's really one of the projects we have in mind. I mean, another project is deploying one of the algorithms that we've deployed in the past, and in a different capacity as a tech academic. So we've developed this tool called My Open Court, which is a series of employment law predictive tool that helps workers and employers to predict the odds of winning a case. And one of the big questions we have is a classifier. So it helps workers and employers to determine whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. So first thing we want to do is deploy that tool for the Deel Lab and for Deel in Canada and the US. And the next step, we want to deploy these tools in 15 jurisdictions. So based on, once we start gathering interesting data on the trends and where violations are occurring, where are the problems, I think might be able, I'm just saying we may not be able, we might be able to come up with better ideas on why some workers are not getting benefits, why they're not getting health coverage, why they're misclassified, diagnostic of what is wrong with the policies.
And will that be in the form of white papers? Like, how are you going to make these recommendations?
So white paper is great. So practical guidelines are great, but we also very much want to involve the academic community. So
Right.
there are many colleagues that have already signed up to contribute to the Deel Lab, a couple of colleagues that in the UK at Oxford and Cambridge, a couple of Canadian colleagues as well, both in McGill and Queen's. There are a couple of American colleagues, a couple of Europeans as well, a couple of colleagues in Asia. So the idea is also to engage both the academic, the policy, and the industry community to contribute both from an academic standpoint. So there's going to be, we'll be targeting top academic journals. The idea is to push forward neutral or at least impartial policy recommendation. And yes, there are going to be white papers, guidelines, and academic publication. And this is also going to take the form of practical tools, compliance-based tools that workers and employers will be able to play with, not necessarily because they want to, it's not a game, just because they want, so that they can really understand better their rights and their obligations also for employers.
That's great that you're opening it up, not just to, like Deel customers or something, but actually to the general public, so to speak. So I think in wrapping up, I would love to get your prediction. So, past few years have brought on a lot of change to the future, to work and the way we work. If Deel Lab does this right, let's say we're having this conversation 3 to 5 years from now, what are the things that you would like to see changed, or what are you watching? What areas are you watching, I guess? Maybe we can start with you, Laura.
Predictions are always risky, but I think that sort of in the very practical space, as Samuel was saying, right, tools that are easier to access, easier to use and understand, particularly for younger companies. As Samuel was saying, right, global companies used to be always large and well-resourced. That's no longer the case. So that sort of democratizing of that aspect, I think that would be a wonderful plus coming out of this. The other area that I find very interesting, and I don't have as much of a prediction as a sort of hope, is that it also produces some thinking outside of the current structures for workers, right? We have fairly old ideas, right? These are ideas that were established probably mostly over 100 years ago or around 100 years ago around what an employee is, what a worker is, and so on. And our world has just changed so much. So I'm sort of excited to see what will be coming out of that.
Samuel, what's success for you?
I think, I agree. I mean, first, from a compliance perspective, I think it would be very much an ideal world. I don't know if it's going to be possible or soon, if we could develop open access tech that could help both workers and employees to understand their rights and obligations. Like, for very simple stuff. Like, you're an employer is onboarding a new employee, and let's say this is a Canadian citizen, but they want to live in Portugal, and they work for an American company. I think the system could guide both the employees and the employees as to what kind of tax residence they fall into. What is the legal category they fall into? Are they entitled to pension? Are they entitled to complementary pension?
Right.
I mean, and ideally, it is not so, I don't think it's so far-fetched, at least if we do get a better understanding of how all the systems work. The idea is not to reinvent the wheel. We're not talking about cutting edge or futuristic AI. The idea is to build smart decision tree that helps just to navigate the system. So that's on the compliance, from the compliance perspective. I think from the policy perspective, this is definitely, this is not a prediction. This is maybe an ideal hope that
no one wants to predict the future here.
Yeah. I'm not an economist, so that's the job for economists. Lawyers, we love problems. So the idea would be to say, okay, so is there a world where, yes, we could overcome the old concept of employer, employee, and think about it from a different perspective, which is very much what Laura said, and pushing forward for some kind of a global legal framework for global workers. Not saying a global floor sounds sometimes a little bit too pessimistic, or the risk is that we just gonna cut down rights for workers, and I don't think this is ideal. And I know the ILO, the International Labor Organization, has been thinking about it for a very long time. They've been working really hard, and a lot of smart people have tried. So I don't think we might be able, we will be successful, but it's still worth, I mean, it's still, at least we might be able to contribute to the discussion. I think that would be at least a milestone.
That feels like a very humble thing. We can contribute to the discussion. I think we can do more than that even. Oh, that's my biased opinion. Well, wonderful. This was great. Thank you both for discussing Deel Lab. We're excited about it. We will definitely want to do this again. Maybe not offer predictions, but have a status update, status check on how things are going. But thank you again for joining this conversation.